Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
Extremely well. How are you doing?
I am also extremely well, and would you like to tell everyone why we're extremely well?
Well, because we are at the place where history teachers would love to be. We're at the Gilder Lerhman Institute in Manhattan. So,
That's right, and we have the good fortune of having the president of the Gilder Lerhman Institute with us, Dr. James Basker. And Dr. Basker is a professor of literary history at Barnard College and Columbia University. He's also overseen the development of education initiatives nationwide, including seminars, traveling exhibitions, digital archives, the National History Teacher of the Year award program. He has also overseen and served as project director for several history exhibitions, including Alexander Hamilton, the man who made modern America. We'll be talking a little bit more about Hamilton the musical a little bit later. Lincoln in his own words, and John Brown, the abolitionist, and his legacy. He's also a trustee in the New York Historical Society. He has attended Harvard and Cambridge and Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He's taught at Harvard University. He's the founder and president of Oxbridge Academic Program, something that I definitely want to discuss a little bit more in this podcast, and has also authored, as if he wasn't busy enough, he's also authored several books, including Amazing Grace, Poems About Slavery, Early American Abolitionists, and American Anti-Slavery Writing, Colonial Beginnings to Emancipation. Whew, I'm tired. So it is with great pleasure that we introduce and welcome Dr. James Basker to our show.
Well, thank you very much, Marc and Nick. It's great to see you guys. It's great to be with you.
And we're very, very excited to have you here with us. And thank you for saying yes to my query email, and very much looking forward to this date for several weeks now. So let's start off right off the bat. For those who are unfamiliar, what does Gilder Lerhman do? What is it and what does it do?
Well, thanks for that great question. We are a not-for-profit that is dedicated to the study and love of American history, and very specifically to helping support K-12 American history across the country and indeed internationally. Our two founders, Richard Gilder and Louis Lehrman, are businessmen but philanthropists who, at our inception, began to donate to us the collection of manuscripts, a 65,000 item collection that they had built privately, the largest in private hands. Instead of giving it to Yale or another institution, they gifted it to the Gilder Lerhman Institute to be our core resource for all our programs of document-based learning and teaching. So we've been blessed from the beginning. We've grown many different programs across the spectrum. We now have 8,600 affiliate schools in all 50 states. We're gaining 1,000 affiliate schools a year. About 4 years ago, we launched a new master's degree program in partnership with Adams State University in Colorado. And we now have 8 courses a year, more than 800 students enrolled. These are all teachers doing master's degree courses with some of the best historians in the country. We have many different teacher development programs or professional development programs, a set of 30 summer seminars with top historians where teachers come for a week in residence with Eric Foner at Columbia University or Richard Cowardine at Oxford University or David Kennedy at Stanford University, and learn about, in intensive ways, these most important subjects in American history. We have traveling exhibitions, 10 of them on different topics that travel the country, visit 35 different states each year. When an affiliate school signs up, they get one of these traveling exhibitions free, which can be the basis for important programming that they do. On our website, we provide thousands of original documents, lesson plans, video clips with major historians, study guides for the AP US History Test and for the SAT-2 in history, and countless other things. We co-sponsor national book awards, the Lincoln Prize, the Frederick Douglass Prize, and the George Washington Book Prize. So we have a host of programs that work in the area of American history, feed each other, but centrally are involved with supporting teachers and helping with the teachers to provide materials for students.
yeah, I mean, I just learned because Mark and I both work in a 7 through 12 school. So you do gear information for elementary school as well.
Yes, it's an area we wish to grow.
Okay.
But some of our material, one of our history boxes, is aimed at elementary schools with 10 units that a teacher who may not be trained in history, but is responsible for it at, say, the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade level, can use without prior degree preparation, can really feel confident they're doing a meaningful history unit with the kids. We have posters such as you see in this room, more than 50 of them, which are available to schools. Many of these are appropriate for elementary school. Elementary school teachers are welcome in our teacher seminars, but increasingly we're turning to that population to ramp up the programming.
And I'm not a paid sponsor of the Gilder Lerhman Institute, but I could tell you that when I was the chairperson of the history department at my school, and we became an affiliate school, which, by the way, was at zero cost to
Yes.
us, which
Should have
is
mentioned
with all
it's
the
free.
benefits, for it to be free is just outstanding. And one of the things that we did was we brought the one of the exhibits to our library, and we invited the classes in, almost like an in-school field trip, and we the teachers and I, using the materials that were already created and established by the Institute, basically created almost like a worksheet. So when they're traveling through the library through this exhibit, it's in a focused way. So they're looking for particular things, because otherwise there's a tendency for them to just walk, do a lap around it and say, okay, great, and now let's get back to class.
Sure.
So this allowed them, the students, an opportunity to really get into the documents. And I can tell you, I also purchased, back when we had a little bit of a budget, which is kind of whittling away nowadays in our economic environment. But I purchased several of the History in a Box sets,
Yes.
and I have to tell you, just and this is a wonderful day for Nick and myself, because we're both history geeks. So this is just an embarrassment of riches for us to be here. But when you have that box and you get it, it's almost, there's a little bit of like a Christmas morning type of aspect to it. And what's really, as I reflect back, because it was probably several years ago now that we received it, in an era now where everything is just on the computer and everyone's bringing things up on their phone, on their iPad, teachers are projecting things on screens, to be able to open up a box and to have a document that's in, it's not the original parchment, of course, but it's designed to replicate that feeling. And it just gives you a completely different appreciation for the historical document, as opposed to if it's just sort of retyped or reproduced, in some sort of PowerPoint presentation. And so just the tangible quality of that History in a Box, I love that. And because it's so easy to reproduce things or to find things on the internet, but to be able to have that experience and give that to kids is just such a different feeling. And I think one that helps to encourage or promote the love of history. So I think they're wonderful.
Well, we've believed in that from the beginning. The value and the impact of primary source documents and direct interaction with those documents. And of course, when they're reproduced in facsimile, students have the sense of them in their original form. We're doing many more things now. We're constantly experimenting, but our curators are beginning a program now that may enable student groups online to transcribe original historical documents in our collection that have never been transcribed. We have 10,000 Civil War soldiers' letters, for example,
Wow.
a high percentage of which have not been transcribed into typescript form. So kids getting to wrestle with 19th century handwriting and working out what words are and seeing the misspellings and the abbreviations and wrestling with it from context. How do I think what these words might be?
Right. And the vocabulary, of course, is
Vocabulary building,
Yeah.
absolutely, in keeping with our teaching literacy through history program, which is a whole aspect of our professional development priorities. But we really think that students wrestling with these things can be an extremely valuable experience, as opposed to just being told about something. They learn by doing.
Absolutely. And that really speaks to one of the missions of Common Core, which Nick and I have spoken a lot about on this show, and the element most about Common Core that we like is that it promotes, or at least it's designed to promote, real analysis, real thinking, and with that, one can only hope comes a lifelong love of learning and a desire to always want to know more and what's around the next corner, as opposed to just wanting to know what I need to know to take a Regents exam or any type of other assessment, which is why when I look through the materials on the Gilder Lerhman website, it's never about, here are some, 10 quick tips to get your kids ready for the Regents exam. It's about promoting a love of learning and a love of history, which to me is just so important, but also so difficult at this particular time. So I wanted to get your take, because on the high school level, on the elementary school level, teachers are being, in a sense, or the plan is to have them assessed based on student performance on their own assessments, which is going to, unfortunately, maybe drive some people towards drilling and killing, as opposed to teaching for a love of history. So how can Gilder Lerhman help teachers sort of work away from that direction of teaching and into a more constructive and positive method.
Well, Mark, it's a complicated area. And one thing I'll tell you that is a matter of policy, we don't get into the debates and discussions about teacher evaluation um, or any of the big policy issues that are politically charged and controversial. And frankly, for us, are a distraction and a waste of energy. Whatever the system, whatever the teachers are doing, whether they have to teach to a test or whether they're free to do, as you're saying, more creative and more authentic teaching, we want to provide materials and resources and support that help them and that are attractive to them, whatever their aspirations. Now, having said all that, I've been a teacher myself for 35 years, and I teach in the summer through my Oxbridge programs in Europe and across the States, high school students since 1985. I've been teaching in college since 1980, and I have a lot of classroom experience. I actually believe that imagination and excitement are prerequisite to learning.
Right.
So for me, the most important thing is to see the lights go on in a kid's eyes. Now, what does that mean with some of the things we're doing now? We'll get to this in a minute, but for the Hamilton education materials that we're using to support the educational outreach for the Hamilton show, we have made short video interviews with members of the cast in the Gilder Lerhman collection holding an original manuscript of Alexander Hamilton's. Wow. So when Lin-Manuel Miranda, who plays Hamilton, is holding a love letter that Alexander Hamilton wrote to Eliza in 1780, in that video clip, students are witnessing the excitement of one of the most famous people of our time, himself getting excited and inspired by the original document. That's the kind of thing we're trying to do. And then through that mechanism, in the educational lesson plans, we're asking students not to recite back information about the founding era. That's an old sort of information-based learning method. Instead, they practice through our lesson plans the interpretation of original documents, how to decode the language, identify the vocabulary, translate them into their own terms so that they feel empowered to understand these documents. And then they choose an original historical figure or episode in the founding era, and they research it in primary source documents on our website, and they compose an original song, an original rap piece, an original poem, an original dramatic scene. And we have just a few weeks ago, April 13th, had the first of these performances at the theater here in New York, where the best of these performances from each of the 12 schools who were attending actually performed their act on the Broadway stage of the Rogers Theater with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Chris Jackson, who plays George Washington, on stage with them.
That's amazing.
It was a magic moment, and you can't imagine the excitement in that house. But for me, what was most exciting about that is we weren't measuring, how much information, like corn stuffed into a goose, how much information had got stuffed into these kids. We were measuring the excitement that they felt, that the founding era was something they cared about. And they wanted to go and research. Why? Because they were going to dig into it for themselves and make their own interpretation, their own original composition.
I think you really get to the heart. I'm sorry, Nick, I know you want to jump in. I think you get to the heart of what Nick and I try to do all the time and what we believe education can be about. I think people want to know their history. I think people want to know science and they want to know literature and they want to know all these subjects. They just are missing that bridge that connects them emotionally to the subject. Because once you find that bridge and once you find an emotional connection to it, then you want to dive in with both feet. And that's why Hamilton is such a huge hit, but not just in terms of box office for Broadway, but for education purposes as well. It very clearly builds that bridge and allows teachers to, and it almost shows them the way. Here's how you can get to the hearts and minds of your students to try to get as much of their interest and engagement. And that's why it's such a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating and so exciting for the students. I was just going to say that you guys have been focusing on primary source documents forever, and now the assessments have caught up to you.
That's right.
At least in New York State, because now I guess in 2 years from now, all of the Regents exams are going to be, the multiple choice questions are going to be stimulus based. They're going to have some form of a cartoon or a founding document or a graph. and the AP exam has already gone in that direction. So there's really not a question, just you guys were so far ahead of that, and the tests have now caught up. I think that's a great marriage right there for teachers to have this as a resource that you guys have been working on for years.
Well, Nick, thank you for saying that. I don't know if they caught up to us, but certainly we're converging. And we've always believed that not just that primary source documents were profoundly important, but that the skills that students develop in engaging with them and interpreting them are skills that they need to have not only in history, but across all disciplines and across all periods of their lives. When they go on to be citizens and they're interpreting what is a newspaper article or an op-ed piece, but a primary source document, they need to interpret in their own terms and not just take as canned information.
Right.
And Nick is a huge proponent of AP, and he's been an amazing AP teacher for a very long time. And there's been a redesign of the AP US History course. I know that Gilder Lerhman has had a little bit of some involvement with the redesign. So can you share a little bit about that?
Well, we just tried to stay in touch with the College Board about the redesign and develop. We spent 6 months and a lot of resources to develop an online study guide, which is free, and it is one of our most popular resources on the web. It's only been up a year. It went up in September of 2014, and in its first year, through Google Analytics, we know that there were 250,000 unique visitors to that site. In a year where only 470,000 students took the test nationally. So we have reason to believe that about half the kids who took the test that year used our guide at some point. And this year, the usage is up another 30%.
Wow.
What we love is the feedback we've had anecdotally from teachers. And teachers are sending their kids to this guide. It's designed, to operate in several ways. Some teachers use it in parallel with their course so that they can send kids there to do supplementary things or complementary things to their own syllabus. Frankly, if a student is in a situation where they don't feel the teaching is very strong, they can go to this guide. And of course, students can go to the guide in the last week or two before the test and either fill in gaps in their background or do an overview review for the whole thing. So it works in many different ways. We're hoping to do that. We've got a similar guide for the SAT-2 test in history, which only about, I think, a fifth as many students take. But again, we've tried to make this available free for students to help improve their performance on these tests, which in turn help them gain admission to college, gain placement in good college courses. It matters a lot to us.
Yeah, I mean, I could say from experience that I think the work is exceptional, and my students, many of them have said the same thing. But I agree with what you said. As a review, a week before the exam, at the very least, it really does provide kids with a context for what is in each time period. For those people who are not familiar with the redesign, they divided up the American history course into 9 different time periods. And a lot of times students they're so concerned that they have to know every detail that ever happened. And I try to say to them so much that it's about understanding the context of each time period. It's not about memorizing every fact, but can you identify that the late 1800s was a time of the rise of big business and the Gilded Age and moving out west? Can you put that in context? Your videos do that very, very well. So it's a great resource. And I thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, Nick. That's what matters to us, is that it's useful to kids.
It really is.
We want to keep it evergreen.
And speaking of programs that are useful, can you tell us a little bit about the Oxbridge academic programs that you run over the summer? Because I was reading about this and I started to try to find my passport and see if I could.
Well, you know
jump
what?
on
We have
board.
teacher seminars. We have teacher seminars in Oxbridge too. One at Oxford, one in Cambridge, one in Paris, and now a new one up at Harvard University. So Oxbridge is an entirely separate thing from Gilder Lerhman, but it's something I founded long before I came to Gilder Lerhman. It may be the reason Mr. Gilder and Mr. Lehrman wanted me to come build programs here 20 years ago. I was a graduate student in England, a scholarship boy at Cambridge, and then at Oxford, and it changed my life completely to have those experiences. So early on, when I was an assistant professor, I got the chance to start the first ever summer school for high school kids at Oxford University. And later another at Cambridge, and now it's grown to 10 summer schools. St. Andrews in Scotland.
Wow.
We've got a new one at Harvard. We've got one here in New York at Barnard and Columbia, one at UCLA, 2 in France, 2 in Spain. And the curriculum is out there. 40 different courses students can take, stuff they can't get in high school. They can do medicine, they can do business, they can do law, zoology, archaeology. So it's a kind of I don't know, it's a fun camp for kids who want to learn new
Mhm.
subjects. And they do it in an enriched environment. You're in Oxford University in a medieval college
Amazing.
with Rhodes Scholars as your teachers.
Right.
You get to do field trips that are astonishing in some of the most historic venues in the world. They're 4-week programs. We get kids from all over the world. About half the kids are American, and the other half are from 80 countries. So being in the program is like being part of an international student body at
Mhm.
Princeton or Stanford or Oxford for that matter. We've loved doing them. And with them, we have teacher seminars. I started as early as 1991, week-long teacher seminars at Oxford and Cambridge and Paris and Harvard. And now that I think about it, it was probably that work I was doing in the late 80s and 90s that made Mr. Gilder and Mr. Lerhman interested in bringing me as a consultant to Gilder Lerhman
Mhm.
in 1996, and then designing the map of programs that we've been developing over the years since. But anybody who'd like is free to get in touch with me and ask about Oxbridge. We have a scholarship program supported by a foundation for kids who can't meet the hit financially.
Mhm.
We get great kids. They apply to us with transcripts and personal statements. Some of the best students you've
Amazing.
ever had a chance to work with. Fantastic.
I imagine these are students who are they're already coming with some form of engagement
Oh,
or interest.
totally. This is not remedial. This is not
Right.
academic boot camp. These are kids who see, wow, an opportunity to go to Oxford and study medicine or study Latin. I mean, every subject, drama, creative writing, everything that they might want to do. So, in fact, more than half the students in our programs across the board are the only student from their school at home. That
Wow.
tells you how independent-minded and
mhm.
enthusiastic these kids are.
They're getting on a plane and going off on their own.
The chemistry is incredible. I really have to say, I have people from Oxford and Cambridge teaching for me who say they love teaching in the summer for us more than during the year with their undergraduates, because the students in the summer are just off the charts excited.
Speaking of your experience in the classroom on the collegiate level, what and be honest because we have pretty thick skin. What are the shortcomings? I'll say strengths also, but what are the shortcomings that you're finding in the student body as they arrive to the college ranks?
Well, I'm lucky. I teach at Barnard in Columbia, and I see terrific undergraduates who are um, just incredibly well prepared by and large. If there are gaps for some, it's in writing. They haven't had enough essay writing, and especially research-based essay writing. But that's a minority of students. And I think, and this is the college teaching involved with this too, I think also I worry sometimes that students arrive with a decided conclusion. They have a political opinion about American history or about English literature or European history, and they haven't yet formed the habit of debating the competing views. And I'm afraid college professors, we don't blame high school teachers for this. I'm afraid college professors are complicitous in this, that, many of my colleagues like to teach in a way that leads the students to understand correctly that,
Right.
this interpretation is right. Rather than, and I take pride in this, that for me, the best class that I teach will be one where the students have had to debate competing interpretations and they can't tell which one I personally embrace.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's an ideal classroom moment, because it's the kids who are wrestling with these ideas for themselves, not just being influenced by the professor's leading view.
Right.
That's what I'd love to see more of in college teaching, and even in graduate work, to be honest with you.
Those are some of my most rewarding memories of lessons where I would have an open-ended aim and we would get through the learning and the document-based inquiry, and we'd get to the end and they would debate back and forth and the bell would ring and the students would come up to past my desk and say, but what's the answer? And I'd say, that's the discussion is the answer. That's the purpose of what we did today. It's not like a mathematics equation where we're looking for the number 7. We're just looking to have the stimulating discussion, and that's where the learning is.
I so agree with you, and I think that there are pedagogical tools and games that we can use. One of the ones I like to use is to have people, and I know many teachers do this, people enter into debates with assigned roles that are not their own.
Hmm.
So you have to represent let's say, a pro-slavery advocate in Congress in a debate. So you have to explore the arguments that that person would make and identify it for temporarily, for
Right,
purposes
right.
of the debate, with their point of view and see what that's about. You have to explore in an abolition debate why there were gradualists who didn't embrace what was obviously morally right,
Mhm.
the extreme abolitionists do, but why would a gradualist exist and what would be their argument? And assigning students to be advocates for a position that is not necessarily theirs. Debate is the best thing
Right.
going, I think, for high school students.
Right. I mean, even just examining Lincoln and his own, the evolution of his own positions on slavery, because he's just typically known as the emancipator, and that's that, as if he kind of walked onto the scene with one purpose of emancipating slaves, which is clearly not how it
If
was.
it had been true and he'd let it be known, he would never have been president.
Right.
So the politician has to be successful in gaining the position in order to implement the policy they wish to do. William Lloyd Garrison couldn't have been elected dog catcher because his views were so extreme that no voters would embrace him. But of course, from our point of view, he had morally the right position.
Hmm.
It just was ineffectual politically. And there would never have been a successful end to slavery in America if it had been left only in the hands of the radicals.
Right. That's a very fair point. I was going to ask about your writing. You've written 3 books that have centered around slavery.
Yeah.
So why are you so drawn to that topic?
I've thought about that a lot. I'm actually originally an 18th century specialist in British literature and write about Samuel Johnson and James Boswell and people like that in the 18th century, and I teach them. But more than 20 years ago, maybe 1992, I began to get interested in what would these writers I've been teaching have to say for students of color, students who cared about the history of race, racism, imperialism, slavery, and so forth. Began to look around at it and began to see it as something that was present in the literature of the 17th and 18th century.
Hmm.
It just had been kind of forgotten. So I began to collect it. And I just have never gone away from it. And it became a transatlantic subject for me, the abolition movement from the 17th to the 19th century. It's infinitely interesting to me. I've done these books on anti-slavery writing. I've got one in progress now that I think is going to be, I don't know, I'm very proud of it. We'll see. It's a collection of writings by Black writers of the founding era between 1760 and 1826, when Adams and Jefferson both died that summer, July 4th.
Mm-hmm.
That 60-year period, the number of Black writers, which, even expert friends of mine, I say, how many can you name? I say,
Right.
maybe 10 or 12, Phyllis Wheatley. And I found more than 150 writers in that period.
That's
Now, they're
amazing.
not all literary figures like Phyllis Wheatley and Jupiter Hammond, but they are people who wrote petitions
Right.
asking for freedom in courts. They wrote op-ed pieces.
Wow.
They wrote public letters between self-help societies. But they are all people who were African American who were writing in the public sphere
Mm-hmm.
in the founding era. And when you begin to bring them all back to view, I have more than 250 texts now. I don't know quite how I'm going to shape them in the final edition, but it's going to reconstitute the founding era with the presence of Black people. Some of them, for example, some of the 6,000 African Americans who fought in the American Revolution, later on writing petitions for pensions, describing their life experience to the government so they could get a pension that they deserved for fighting in the war. Some slave narratives, some autobiographies, some conversion narratives, some sermons. I mean, reconstituting the founding era, not just culturally, but with the civic life of Black people who were trying to be citizens in every way.
That's amazing.
I'm just glad that I knew Phyllis Wheatley and Jupiter Hammond. But those I do know. I'm not sure if I know the others, obviously.
Well, there are a lot of interesting people.
Wow, yeah.
A lot of them. Lemuel Haynes, who was in the American Revolution and then was a preacher for 30 years, had a white congregation in Vermont and upstate New York for 30 years.
Oh, really?
He wrote sermons, but he also wrote one anti-slavery piece that wasn't published in his lifetime. It came afterwards. So there are these figures, some of them slaves who managed to escape and tell their story after the fact. Some of them writing petitions to Congress when it was sitting in Philadelphia in the 1790s, asking for an end to slavery. Documents, many of them I've never seen before, and I'm going to try to bring them all back.
That's very
That's
exciting.
unbelievable. Have you read Doug Blackman's Slavery by Another Name?
Yes, yes. I mean, there's so
I
many
love that
important
book, yeah.
interpretations. That's a great one. And of course, the debates today about incarceration rates,
Mhm,
which play to exactly that problem, the
mhm,
disproportionate percentages of black men in prison. But Slavery by Another Name playing to that
mhm.
this phenomena in the 20th century.
Yeah, that really opened my eyes. I was blown away by that book because, I'm familiar with Joe Turner's Come and Gone, the August Wilson play, and I had a sense of what that was like, but I mean, he just tore the lid off that thing, and
Mm.
I couldn't believe the numbers of people who are basically slaves after the fact, and for how long it went, well into the 20th century, which is it just reshaped everything, how I looked at everything
Mm.
and perceived everything. It was incredible work. So, you had mentioned Hamilton before, and Nick and I, we have almost this running thing every episode. I'm obsessed with Hamilton, and I think Nick is too, but he just doesn't want to admit it as much as I am. But uh, we both had the opportunity to see the show early on in its
Great.
run, and I haven't stopped listening to the soundtrack since. But so I guess the first question is, can you get us tickets? Is that
And that's a question I get asked most often, and the answer is absolutely not.
okay?
I can't even get my own family tickets to the show. Uh, but as you're hinting, we have been blessed at Gilder Lerhman to be funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and really with the extreme cooperation of Hamilton, the producers, the cast, the director, everyone in Hamilton, to do the educational outreach here in New York initially. And as you know, the scale of the grant is for 20,000
Hmm.
inner city kids, all of whom go to Title I schools. So 70% or more free lunch eligible students, the poorest population in the city, to come to the show. But to do a curriculum that prepares them to really respond to the show fully. So the curriculum that our educational team, with Tim Bailey as the director of education, and the former history teacher of the year in 2009, worked up, has the students working with a pair of primary source documents, one by Hamilton and one by a loyalist named Seabury, who's in the
In the
play,
show. Hmm.
and debating certain principles around the founding. And there are steps that the classroom, under the leadership of the teacher, will take, paraphrasing, unpacking those texts, getting the tough, difficult vocabulary under control, then paraphrasing the key concepts, and then really coming to understand them as a preparation to become skillful enough to do their own research. And the next step is that from a set of founding era characters and episodes, students are to pick one, and they can do this in pairs or solely or triple. They to go off and research that character and create their own song, their own rap piece, their own dramatic scene or poem, an original creative composition. Every kid in the school does this. And then they perform them in the school, and the one that is elected or judged the best from that school, when the school group comes to Hamilton in the morning, they get to perform it live
Amazing.
in front of the cast of Hamilton and 1,200 students in that theater. So literally these kids,
Unbelievable.
one from each of the 12 schools who came, were making their Broadway debuts with original pieces. But the range of the creativity, you guys can hardly believe it. I mean, I was up at a theater school in the Bronx, which was one of the schools coming, and Lynn Miranda came there 2 weeks before the show to meet with the kids at 9 o'clock in the morning. And in that room, mostly kids of Hispanic descent, who were like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who grew up in the same neighborhood.
Mhm.
We had one kid who decided to create a song in the voice of an illegitimate son of Thomas Jefferson by Sally Hemings.
Wow.
This was a great big tall black kid, wonderful student, and he found that piece of American history his way in, and he
Mhm.
created this
Mhm.
character and this poem. We had another girl who chose Phyllis Wheatley, the poet who had written in honor of George Washington and was herself an American patriot.
Mhm.
She chose to write in the voice of Phyllis Wheatley. We had another kid, imagine it, a 17-year-old in high school who said, the election of 1800, that's the important subject. And she wrote a song about
That's
that.
amazing.
We had kids from Fort Hamilton who showed up. One set of 3 kids did a duet between Eliza and Hamilton in rap form, and Eliza in a ballad form. So you had two musical styles. These kids composed original pieces. The creativity is endless, and the energy with which these kids engage in creating these pieces is one of the most exciting things I've seen as an educator in my career.
Are it is amazing, but are the teaching resources, are they available to schools that are not in the city, or is it just for schools that
So,
are?
Nick, you're on it.
Yeah.
This is the key thing. Not yet.
Okay.
I mean, Rockefeller's been very generous with us, but Rockefeller and Hamilton, working with Gilder Lerhman, they want to treat this as a careful experiment.
Okay.
You know, they had no idea if this would succeed. We're a month into this, and we've seen now the brilliant success of these lesson plans and of these creative pieces the kids are doing. So there are plans now to grow this program. It's going to continue annually in New York. In the fall, we're beginning in Chicago.
Oh, great.
There's going to be a second production of the show in
Mhm.
Chicago, and we're going to be doing the educational programming there. The following year, a new production in California, San Francisco and LA. We're going to be doing that. And eventually, I've had this talk with Jeffrey Seller, who's the brilliant lead producer, wonderful guy, generous guy, and with the Mirandas. Eventually, the goal is to make this material available to every school in America, regardless of their ability to see the show in a theater in their town. So through the web, we'll be able to stream productions and so on. But it's a matter right now of getting all the pieces right. And of course, the Hamilton show is itself producing a documentary film, producing a book. So they're careful about how much of this spills over without proper controls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but I will tell you, the word has gotten out, because I cannot tell you the number of people who have emailed me about your program saying, because they know my obsession with the play, saying you should get on this, and I have to respond, I don't work in New York City.
Yeah.
I hope they don't,
Yeah.
so the word is out though.
So
it's
we're
a
dying
wonderful
to do
program.
this, and you can imagine it wasn't just geographically limited, it was targeted in the initial grant only for
Absolutely.
high school. We wanted middle school kids to be able to do this. We wanted kids, because my own kids, I have a junior in high school, at a school in Boston, she knows the soundtrack, but she's not going to be eligible to see the show, through the New York City thing.
It's mostly juniors in high school, right?
It is
Yeah.
mostly juniors in high school. If there's a kid in the AP class who's a sophomore or a senior,
Okay.
that. But the schools have a certain amount of flexibility, but they want the kids who are prepared with the
Taking, right.
curriculum
Mhm.
to come and appreciate the show. Lin Miranda has said publicly twice when I've seen him, and he's such a fantastic person as well as a genius. He has said twice that his dream is ultimately of the day when Hamilton can be performed by high school
Right, I heard
groups.
him say that.
And, so you think of West Side Story,
Sure.
or you think
Yep.
of Camelot, or some of the shows that high school kids put on in there. Think of Hamilton when one day it's the musical that high schools are performing.
And it will be, yeah.
Did you get to see the play at the Public Theater?
I saw it at the Public, and I've seen it at Broadway.
How many changes did he, I mean, I know you can't really say, but
I haven't sensed that many changes.
No, okay.
I'll say two or three things, mostly about audience experience. When I saw it at the Public in April, the first spring, a year ago, when it was offered, it had only been up for about 6 weeks or so,
Mhm.
and it just caught everybody by surprise.
Yeah.
You could kind of feel the audience collectively have an intake of breath and then an explosion of applause. Now, since October, November, December, when I'm in the theater and see the show, I hear people who've come knowing the lyrics.
Mhm.
In fact, Lin Miranda said to the kids up in the Bronx, he said, usually the 40 people in the front row are like human teleprompters, singing along with them.
Right.
And we heard it even with our kids. They knew the song so well in April that they were sort of joining in or applauding characters as they walked on stage, knowing the song that was going to come. So there's an energy now of collaboration between the audience and the cast. And I think the cast feeds on that energy too.
I could tell you that, well, first, I'm proud of you, Nick, that you publicly admitted that you have an obsession with Hamilton. So good for you for being honest with yourself. But back in September, I took 40 students from my school to see Hamilton because I wanted to see it in the public. I heard amazing things. I had tickets up on my screen for when they opened up the second extension at the Public, and I maybe blinked or went to wash my hands, and by the time I came back, the tickets were gone and the show was sold out. So that was my first mistake. Was as soon as it opened up last spring for the Broadway run, I immediately jumped on a whole block
for
of
you.
tickets, and I brought 40 kids with me and some teachers. And the aftermath of that, it happened to be the same day that the soundtrack came out. So I literally got up from the train, and as soon as I was on the, on the ground level, and I had an internet signal. I downloaded it on my phone, and I started listening from the car ride home, and basically haven't stopped until about a week ago. Where I had to force myself to take a break, but no pun intended. But the response by the students was so unbelievable, and for weeks after, every time I saw students with their earbuds in, and I'd say, what song's your favorite right now? And they'd say this or that, and we just had this collective, like you had mentioned before at the public, there was this collective experience where you heard great things, but you hear great things about a lot of things. So you think, okay, it'll be good, maybe it'll be very good, but you just don't expect it to kind of overwhelm you emotionally. At least on my own personal experience, I thought it was going to be clever. I loved In the Heights. I thought it would be, musical, it'd be high energy, it would be fun, and that would be it. And that would be a perfect night of theater, and I'd be happy with that. But it's so much more, and it's so much more engaging. And it's not just about Hamilton; it's about Burr, it's about Washington, it's about seeing the Schylers in a different way. So, and it just is so unbelievable. And then, so it really leads me to this point. I was a Jeffersonian up until September 24th. I saw the show on the 25th. Now I'm a Hamiltonian. So what has taken so long for this Hamilton resurgence and this, I guess at the Washington Book Prize, that I forget who had made the reference, but there was basically like a bear market on Jefferson.
It may have been Lou Lehrman,
It
one
was
of
it
our
was it?
co-founders.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And I thought he coined that so perfectly. So why is it that we're experiencing historically this bear market in Jefferson and this resurgence of the Hamiltonian era?
It's a great question and a great story. And you guys, as historians, I'm sure have your own views on this. But we have to remember that from 1800 until Lincoln was elected, with the exception of John Quincy Adams, the slaveocracy and the sympathizers with the slave economy were in the presidency and were dominant in American political life. And who's going to tell your story? And Andrew Jackson canceling the bank.
Right.
Hamilton was not in favor of a slave-based agrarian economy, which is what prevailed from 1800 down to the Civil War. He was in favor of a modern, diversified economy with manufacturing, banking, trade, and so on. Not popular in the South, but the South was ascendant for a great deal of that time. So that's one issue. And I think in the 20th century, there were some accidents as well. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was very much a Hamiltonian president in some ways. He believed in infrastructure and a strong federal government. He believed in foreign intervention, which he struggled to get to happen. But he came along at a point when the Depression was seen as caused by Wall Street. And Hamilton was the pinup boy for Wall Street.
Right.
So FDR cleverly adopted Hamiltonian policies, but he upheld Jefferson as the true Democrat, ironically, a slave master as a Democrat.
Right.
But he built the Jefferson Memorial during his administration in Washington. So Jefferson had this run that I think was a gift in many ways. I like to say that I believe Jefferson was the first Hamiltonian president, because even though they disagreed about everything in the 1790s, Jefferson's presidency, 2 terms, there was only one thing that was really transformatively important, and it was the Louisiana Purchase.
Right.
He could not have made the Louisiana Purchase without a strong executive, which Hamilton believed in, and without a financial system to bankroll the purchase, which Hamilton made possible. Jefferson could never have been a great president without becoming a Hamiltonian president. And I think it's an irony that not many historians really mention, but it's there. So Hamilton's certainly having his moment. There's been a role. We did that New York Historical Society exhibition, Gilder Lerhman and New York Historical Society, and I was the project director back in 2003. And it was seen then as a moment, partly because the New York Historical Society was about to have its 200th anniversary, partly because the 200th anniversary of Hamilton's death in a duel in 1804 was about to occur. So it was seen that way.
And that was right around the time that Chernow's book had come out, right?
Chernow's book came out just a few months later.
Oh, okay.
There's a story to that. But we knew he was writing it. But Ron, at that point, wasn't involved in scripting the exhibition. His book came out a little bit later, because we came to Ron in 2003, but he was still in progress writing it. Rick Brookhiser, who wrote a book on Hamilton in the 90s, a very good one, actually was the writer for the show. But That show repositioned Hamilton. We didn't just claim he was a great New Yorker or an important founding era figure. We talked about him as the man who made modern America. And we put that $10 bill, huge scripted $10 bill, on the outside of the New York Historical Society to really call attention to that institution and to Hamilton and his legacy.
Mhm.
And it was a pretty high impact project. There were 50,000 school kids went through that show, which was 10 times more than had ever gone through a show there before. And it was the beginning now of the marvelous ascendancy of the New York Historical Society, which in the last 12 years has become arguably the most important cultural institution in New York. I mean, it's thriving. Just a few months into it, of course, Ron Chernow's book came out, and we knew Ron very well. And by no accident at all, the jury for the George Washington Book Prize, which was founded that year by Gilder Lerhman and Mount Vernon, the jury chose Hamilton by Ron Chernow as the first winner of the George Washington Book Prize. So Ron Chernow received a $50,000 award from us for that book, and of course he's been a good friend ever since. It was Ron who made the introduction between the producers of Hamilton and the Gilder Lerhman Institute. So
that's great.
We love Ron, and he is an absolutely brilliant writer. Not just Hamilton, but his biography of Washington, everything he's written is marvelous history. But it's no surprise that that's the book that inspired Lynn Miranda.
That's amazing. I love that story. So let me ask you this one final question. If you could be king for a day, not necessarily for a lifetime, but for a day, what changes would you like to see made in our system of education? And select the level, if or include them all. Your choice.
What changes? Well, there are probably a few, and some of them aren't necessary changes because some teachers are already doing them. But I would love for education at every level to be more and more about imagination. I don't mean in a careless way, just play with crayons in school book. But I mean imaginative approaches to engaging kids and making them feel that learning is something they're doing, not something that they're being subjected to. So whatever that takes. By imagination, I mean first imagination in the minds of the teachers that then can do things that engages the imagination of kids, whatever that takes. I always think that, in a given classroom of kids, there are probably 4 or 5 different approaches that are needed. Kids learn in different ways, and different things excite different kids. So I would love a little more openness on that front. On the other hand, which is going to make me sound like an unreconstructed traditionalist, I would love it if teachers, especially at the middle and high school level, were first trained in their subject and subsequently in pedagogy and classroom management and adolescent psychology and poverty in the classroom and the things that I think sometimes in educational training come first. And because in our experience, we find teachers turning to us for a lot of the serious content, the serious history at the core of their subject, which they love, but they didn't get enough of as they were being trained educationally. So I would say that. I'd love to see also more flexibility about people being able to make teaching part of their career, but perhaps late in their career, early in their career, and be able to make it a more fluid kind of career where teachers could come in and out. Maybe even there would be sabbaticals for teachers to develop other approaches and so on. I have a brother who's an engineer in the oil business, and he'd love to be a classroom teacher, but there isn't really an easy way for him to make that transition, in his 50s to go over the wall. I'd love to see a little more fluidity like that, because I think there are a lot of people in society who could help in the educational enterprise.
But the barrier to entry is steeper and steeper as you move along.
I know it is, and I want to say the last thing because it's not the last thing. I never have the last thing. I'm like you guys. I want to keep talking about these things.
And we want to keep listening.
Yeah.
Teachers deserve more credit and more esteem. My mother was an elementary school teacher, and I know what she put into her teaching for kids, some of them desperately poor in Grants Pass, Oregon, where I grew up, second poorest county in the state of Oregon. um, countless other. My aunt was a teacher. My cousin in India is a teacher. Um, I know what teachers do and what they care about. And as a college professor, I visit schools, and it's hilarious. You know, my colleagues at college level will complain if they have 3 courses to teach per semester. And high school teachers are in there at 7:30 in the morning till 4:30, unless they coach a sport or debate team. They're there till 6 o'clock. They
That's
take a
right.
stack of essays home to
That's
grade.
right.
I mean, my colleagues in the university can't believe how hard teachers work. So I think systematically, we need to pay more tribute to teachers. I think parents and even members of the general public should pay more attention and more tribute and more support. We started with Laura Bush's help when she was in the White House, the History Teacher of the Year program in 2003-4, and we've been doing it every year. I think it's one of the most important things that we support. There's a History Teacher of the Year in each of the 50 states who's chosen from all the nominations in that state. And then, like the Miss America pageant, the 50 state winners are finalists for the National History Teacher of the Year. But way down at the ground level, we set it up so that anyone can nominate a teacher for History Teacher of the Year. It could be a colleague, it could be a principal, but it also could be a family whose child benefited from a teacher, or a member of the public who knows about a good teacher. Because I think in many ways that initial nomination where a teacher knows that someone in their community nominated them for History Teacher of the Year, that is where the support and the endorsement means the most, psychologically.
True.
So we've set that system up. And if anybody hears this podcast and cares about teaching at all, I want them to go out and nominate a teacher. All they have to do is give us the name and the school, and we'll do the rest. We'll contact the teacher and get nomination materials and so on. But to give us the name, because, and it's for every teacher from elementary through high school, but it's a program where every teacher knows they've been honored from the moment that they've been nominated, right up through the eventual winner at the national level.
I'd like to nominate Nick.
Oh.
He already has a sash made up. He's just waiting for it to be.
He's
official.
ready for the award. We don't have the bathing suit competition anymore.
Thank God.
He's astounding. I mean, I don't want to embarrass him.
But we can't do enough, I think, to provide enrichment and resources for teachers, and at the same time to say thank you. I mean, every person, I'll say this about when we announce the award, every person remembers at least one teacher who made a difference in their lives. When we were in the White House in January 2004, announcing this program, John Now, who's one of our trustees and a friend of the Bushes who had helped us set it up, he and I both, in our remarks, mentioned an elementary school teacher who had been the most important person in our lives, apart from our parents. And we were proud to be able to name that person. In my case, it was Bill Baker, who was my elementary school principal and science teacher, and in fact, whose son still lives in my hometown of Grants Pass, Oregon. But Bill Baker, I was proud to be able to mention his name in the White House, because I'm sure it never had been before.
Right, that's amazing. And just you talking about it, I could see the way your whole body language changes. And we all experience that too when we talk about that person or those people who inspired us early on. We'll never forget them. They're a part of us, and it evokes such wonderful memories and feelings because it drives you, and it shapes you literally for a lifetime based on the lessons that they taught you and the way that they conducted themselves, the way they were role models, regardless of what they said or what they did. It didn't matter. It was all part and parcel of the message that they were sharing with us, and the learning that they were sharing with us. So speaking of learning, we've learned a lot in this podcast, and we just could not be happier to have shared this time with you, Dr. Basker. And this is our 1-year anniversary of this podcast. I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate our first anniversary, but with a wonderful discussion with you. And so thank you so much for being here. And
I have to, thank you. This was a tremendous experience, and you're a very, very impressive individual, and your passion and commitment to American history is something you should be very proud of, because you've done a great service to so many people.
You guys are great to do this, and thanks. I'm honored that you invited me to be on. Really glad to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying yes. And for those of you who would like to find us on the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com. If you have any questions or would like to suggest a topic, it's ask@stateofedpodcast.com. We will definitely be tweeting about this at SOE Podcast. We'll also put up links about the Gilder Lerhman Institute and Oxbridge program and the Teacher of the Year nomination and everything else on our website, so you can easily find it and nominate that really wonderful teacher in your life or that colleague that you work with. That would be terrific. And just a reminder, we're going to be at Ed Camp this October in Nassau County, and we're very much excited about that. And that wraps up this really wonderful show. And thank you, Nick. Dr. Basker, thank you so much. And this was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Take care.